Hello, and welcome to sunny Las Vegas, specifically Nellis Air Force Base. And the reason why we're here is we want to talk about, obviously, suppression of enemy air defences as depicted in Command Modern Operations. Actually, we want to look at the way that different nations do this same job, but the nation that most people first think about, particularly since Vietnam, is the US. Now, the US has a dedicated seed aircraft, which is the F-16. They carry the HARMS, which is the dedicated anti-radiation missile that the US uses. And so, to demonstrate this, to demonstrate its effectiveness, we'll need a target. And fortuitously, and much to the alarm of the local townspeople of the nearby town of Crown Point, the dastardly Russians have managed to parachute in an S-400 into neighbouring Arizona. Why they've done this is known only to them, but they've done it nevertheless. But the US Air Force have put together a lovely little strike package, which is going to look to destroy this this SAM battery. Now, the way that I've put this together is I'm going to launch the first 8 aircraft manually, which is loaded up with the mild decoy. Now, what this is going to do is hopefully it's going to overload the battery's capacity to actually defend itself against what it thinks is a large airstrike coming its way, but it's actually these disposable decoys. And it hopefully should basically use up all of its interceptors on those decoys. That's the theory. Now, once that's occurred, these 2 escort aircraft, F-16s, will thunder in, launch their HARMS, destroy the radar, so that even if the battery does reload, there's nothing it can do. To these aircraft, which are more F-16s carrying the CBU-103, which are cluster munitions, and that should destroy the rest of the battery. Now we'll see if that actually occurs as I have described once we launch the mission, which we'll do. So, what I will do is I will launch these decoys manually, which seems to be the way to do it in the latest command patch. And if anybody has a less micromanagey way of doing this that they know, please do let me know. So those F-16s now have launched what should be maybe 30 molds, and they can return to base. Now, hopefully, those molds will run this SAM battery out of actual interceptors. And once they get close, this is the next part of the strike package that should come thundering in with its HARMS first and then its CBUs. That does look like the S-400 is now out of interceptors, which is good news for these F-16s. So, these F-16s now should launch their HARMS. And there they go. SAM's defenseless. It cannot shoot these things down until it reloads. And now it can't shoot anything down because its radar is now destroyed. And here come the CBUs. Now, I would be rapidly running away now if I was an operator on this SAM battery, because it's now completely destroyed, and that's a pretty textbook piece of seed. Now, if we look at the losses and expenditures, yeah, 31 MALDs, 4 harms, and 4 CBUs, and we've destroyed the entire battery, basically. Now, that's a pretty effective way of destroying a single standalone battery. Obviously, if you're looking at an integrated air defence system, you're going to need to scale that up quite a lot, and that can get quite expensive. These things aren't cheap. So there might be other ways that other countries do this. There is another branch of the US military that does this same job, which is the US Navy. And now the US Navy does this slightly differently. It does have the MALD, I think, in command, but it also has this aircraft, which is the A-18G. Now, this is a specific electronic warfare aircraft which uses jamming to actually jam the radar of the SAM. Now, we've got 4 of these in our strike package, as well as 4 Super Hornets with more CBUs. Now we'll see if the Navy can do as good a job as the Air Force using just jamming rather than running the S-400 out of interceptors. Now, this is quite risky because the S-400 is designed to resist jamming. So we don't know exactly how this is going to turn out, but let's find out. So we've got our Super Hornets in front with the CBUs, and we've got our Growlers. Now, if you're familiar with British slang, you'll be giggling at the name. If you're not, then I won't go into it. But regardless, these guys in the back have got their jammers on. And they're going to launch a newer version of the Harm, which is the Argum ER. A more modern and longer range version. And they're actually going to get slightly closer. They're not going to launch at max range. Now again, the entire strike package is reliant on the jamming here. And yeah, they've done a pretty good job of disabling the radar, and the rest is pretty much a formality. There's more harms going in just for good measure. They'll probably launch some more as well. Yeah, there they go. A little bit of overkill. Uncharacteristic of the US Navy. And then we've got these CBU carriers coming in to finish the job. Now, these CBUs are unguided, a little bit less sophisticated than the ones that the F-16s were using. And that means these guys have to come in at pretty low altitude to drop them, which does leave them open. If these guys have some man pads, which they'd be sensible to have, it does leave the F-18s, the Super Hornets, coming in slightly vulnerable to that sort of attack. But they're pretty advanced aircraft, so they might probably will be able to deal with it. But let's see. Yep, they're being engaged, but they've destroyed the battery. So, yeah, they weren't really troubled by that, and the battery's dead. Now let's see what the losses and expenditures were. Yeah, we've used 6 of these more advanced harms, 2 CBUs, and a couple of flare cartridges, which have seen off the probably an Igla man pads. But we have destroyed the entire battery. Probably more cheaply, although these things are still very expensive, but probably more cheaply than the US Air Force did. Of course, something that's coming down the track for the US Navy is the F-35. Now, it'd probably be remiss of us to leave out something that's going to be in service pretty soon to see if the F-35 can actually do a better job than the F-18 does at the moment. Now, the F-35 does have its own, supposedly, so command says, its own jamming technology. So it's a jamming aircraft and strike aircraft in one, whereas the F-18 needs two different aircraft. So I suppose we should see whether the F-35 can work in one airframe. So our strike package goes like this. We've got the AARGM carriers, 4 of, and 4 cluster munition carrying aircraft, which are using the slightly newer guided weapon, which is the slightly longer range JSO, but it's basically just a more advanced cluster munition than the ones that the F-18s were using. So we'll see if the F-35 can actually jam the S-400 better than the Growlers can. So it's managing to protect the F-35 package so far, but can it actually protect its own missiles? There they go. No. No. The S-400 looks like it isn't spoofed by that. Having another go. No. And there go the JSOs as well. JSOW. More AARGMs going in. But the S-400's dealing with that. And there go the F-35s. They've had enough. Sting in the tail. But unless the JSOLs can actually get through, then it looks like the strike is going to be unsuccessful, and it is. So there you go. For anyone that was wondering, it looks as though, for the time being in command, the F-35s are going to have to be escorted by the Growlers. Now, the Russians are in the sea business as well. And obviously, they don't have to deal with the S-400. Their main adversary would be the American Patriot battery, which, returning the favour, the Americans have somehow managed to smuggle into the centre of Russia. And the Russians are going to deal with it a little bit like they've been dealing with Patriots in Ukraine. This is the best sort of way that I can recreate what they've been doing with Patriots in Ukraine. So their launch, it seems, large numbers of these Shahed UAVs, which are basically your decoys. And then they've been actually using this Kinzhal hypersonic missile to actually destroy the battery. Now, this thing's, like I said, hypersonic, which should, in theory, defeat the Patriot, but the warhead is a unitary warhead rather than the cluster munitions that we've been using already, which, against a pretty well-dispersed SAM battery, isn't the ideal warhead, really, that you want to use. But the thing is going at 1 billion miles an hour, so, you know, the kinetic energy from this thing might help it cause more damage, just the sheer speed of it. But let's see. So this is an enormous, frankly, group of decoys all launching from the airfield, and they take a long time to get to target as well. But the benefit that these things do have is they are actually they will actually try to avoid missile. They will take evasive action, which makes it a better option than a mold, a slower option. So if you were actually a human operator on these things, then, and there we go. But I think if you were in real life a human operator on one of these things, you'd be pretty able to tell that what you were shooting at was doing 87 knots. And no, it wasn't a strike aircraft. But nevertheless, the AI have actually shot at these things. And it looks as though they've used up all their missiles. And there we go. These are the Kinjals coming in now to strike a defenceless Patriot battery. And there I think we see they've got through. Now they might have got through anyway, regardless of the Patriot using up all of its missiles. But we see the downside of it as well, because that Patriot battery only has medium damage. And if we look at the other side, 40% damage. Looks like 3 tells destroyed, but the radar's still up. We've still got 3 more tells operational. That SAM battery is still more than operational. And there we see the downside. Now, that's the nearest sort of simulation of reality. Now, the Russians do have cluster munitions. They do have anti-radiation missiles, so I could set that up in a different way and use those things. But that's the way that the Russians have been operating in Ukraine. But as I say, you could set it up in the same way that the US Air Force operated against their S-400. But another nation that's now entering the seed game, obviously, is China. And very much like the Russians, they're going to have the Patriot to deal with. Now, the Chinese are a little bit similar, actually, to the US Navy in the way that they approach it. They've also got a dedicated electronic warfare aircraft. This is the Chinese version of the EA-18. And this thing jams radars as well, and it carries the I think it's the YJ-91 anti-radiation missile, which is a copy of basically the Russian KH-31, and this is basically a bigger, longer range version of a HARM missile. And in this strike package, they're going to be escorting a 4-ship of J-10s armed with just bog standard LGBs, 500-pound LGBs. Now again, a little bit like the Kinjal, these are unitary warheads, but there's more of them, so it may cause more damage, probably will. Whether it's as effective as a cluster munition, probably not. So will it destroy the battery? Let's find out. So we've got the jamming aircraft in the rear again as escorts. Actually, the range on that YJ-91 doesn't look that different to a HARM. It's certainly an ARGM. But nevertheless, the mission is the same. And there we go. Now these guys are going to follow these missiles in just to keep the jammers pointed at the Patriot. And there we go. That's the radar down. So it's just these guys' job now. Just come in and drop the LGBs on target. Now, I think these guys will actually re-attack if they don't destroy it immediately in the first pass. There we go. That's pretty much one crippled Patriot site, and everyone goes home. Let's have a look. Yeah, 66% damage. Radar is down. Most of the tells are destroyed. Now, these tells still operational, but they've got no radar. Their best option now is to pack up and go and hide in the hills somewhere, rearm, get reconstituted. Nevertheless, that SAM is no longer a threat, and we haven't really used too much in the way of ordnance. A couple of anti-radiation missiles and 8 LGBs. That's a pretty efficient way of dealing with a SAM by the Chinese. Of course, there are other nations that probably will at some stage need to deal with surface-to-air missile systems, and one of those is France. Now, France doesn't really have any kind of dedicated electronic warfare aircraft or a dedicated anti-radiation missile, but what it does have is obviously the Rafale, and it carries these scalp missiles. Now, they're not unique to France. Most modern nations have some sort of stealthy long-range cruise missile, but this would probably be what a reasonable-sized nation like France would have to use if it didn't have the kind of dedicated aircraft and weaponry that we've been looking at. And again, the warheads on these things, unitary penetrator warhead, but it is £1,000, which is more than the Kinjals had. But again, also not a dedicated weapon for highly dispersed targets like a SAM battery. There are going to be more of them though. Every one of these Rafales carries 2 scalps, so that's going to be 24 scalps in total. I'd imagine that something as advanced as an S-400 will see and be able to defend itself against these sorts of weapons. Whether some can get through and actually destroy the battery, probably not, but it probably will damage it. But we'll see. Now, another thing as well, these Rafales are going to have to get inside the engagement range of the SAM to actually launch, which makes them pretty vulnerable. See, I would be expecting missiles coming at us now. So we need to launch pretty quickly. And then run away. And these guys are pretty brave, and they're taking their sweet time to launch. Looks like they're waiting until inside radar range, which they are. And that's a pretty risky strategy. And now they need to run. Yeah, and there come the missiles. Now, against an aircraft running away like that at fairly long range, advanced aircraft that can actually use quite a lot of countermeasures, pretty low chance of actually hitting the things, even for a battery this advanced. But now it's got something else to worry about. It's got 24 of these scalps coming towards it. Now, this is a system that's actually specifically designed to defend against these sorts of things. and it's starting to, can any of these things, can any of them actually get through? Or it could have run out of missiles. Yeah, the last 4 actually got through. But the radar is still operational, as you can see. So unless there are, every single one of the tells has been destroyed, which it doesn't look like it is, like they are. In fact, the majority of them are still fine. The radar is up, the tells are up, apart from 3. That again is another perfectly serviceable SAM battery. A little bit battered and bruised, but if any French aircraft flew into this circle, it's pretty dead still. So again, we've seen the downside of not being able to jam the SAM or basically make it feel threatened enough to use up all of its missiles on decoys, and also the downside of a unitary warhead against a SAM battery. Now, something that the RAF and Royal Navy actually have in development to overcome this sort of thing is this weapon, which is the Spear 3, which is a mini cruise missile. I think the Americans have something similar, the Stormbreaker. But this weapon actually has a specific electronic warfare variant, which is this, the Spear EW. And the way this works, it works a little bit like a jamming decoy. So think of an EA-18 or a J-19 that actually launches from the aircraft, and it's also steerable, which makes it even more useful because you can launch the thing, and if any variable changes after launch, you can actually steer the missile. And basically, a little bit like a growler, the cone in front of the missile is jammed. So as long as you keep this thing pointed at the SAM, it should jam anything within that cone. But it is a little bit more fiddly to actually use because, again, in command now it looks as though you've got to basically manually launch any kind of decoy vehicle. So the way we do this is we'll launch it at max range, and we'll launch all the missiles, and they go home. And so now these jammers are actually, they camouflage in the aircraft behind them, which is this strike package of basically standard Spear 3 carriers. And they should just do their job all the way until these guys launch. Now, this is where the steerability of these weapons comes into play, because once these weapons actually overfly the SAM or fly off at a slightly different direction and actually move outside of that cone, so to speak, this SAM is going to see these spears. So we can actually move these guys back onto track, and hopefully we can move them behind our spears if we want to as well, like so. So this S-400 now, in theory, should be completely blind to these missiles bearing down on it. Let's see if it works. Now, the radar is working there. But it cannot see these missiles. And there they go. And yeah, I've actually fired more than is needed. So the losses and expenditures, 36 spears, 12 spear EWs. You could probably half that if needed. And these things are pretty small, relatively cheap. And that is the modern high-tech version of destroying a surface-to-air missile system, even one as advanced as an S-400. Now, obviously, you're not going to ever be, if the person that's made the mission has any ability, you're not going to be going up against one S-400 or one Patriot ever in a mission. You really, I mean, the game actually has, you can load in proper integrated air defense systems from most countries, so you'd have to scale that up enormously, but which would be time consuming, but it is doable. What works for one system will work for more, as long as you can keep air superiority. But that is how you defeat the S-400 and the Patriot system. Thank you for watching.